Ahsoka, Balance of Truth, Book 1, Chapter 15. Palpatine already knew the outcome before Saint Pestich had even asked for an audience. His plans were compromised again by the cunning Togruta, even though he sensed she didn't quite grasp the meaning her actions were imparting on not only her destiny, but his as well. Stewing after the conversation with Vader, he was on the verge of transcribing his apprentice's thoughts and intentions before that same apprentice veiled his contempt. Yes, you do channel your hatred perfectly when it's most crucial to do so, the thought compounding his love-hate relationship with his Sith ally. He knew, sensed, that he and Vader were on different paths to the same goal, and for all these years he had been the perfect tool to exact the detailed executions needed to bring the grand plan to fruition. But something was changing. Yes, Vader's hatred of the Order was a potent weapon and had served him well in dispatching the nemesis of the Sith. Still, the anger was constantly dissipating, as if to serve a directional agenda Palpatine could not sense or anticipate. Despite deep meditation focused on the subject, Palpatine couldn't put his finger on that agenda or its motive. Assuaged to finally be over Vader's meticulous efforts to bring Padme back to the mortal realm, he had initially suspected it was his apprentice's failure, yet again, to challenge the divisions of life and death, of which there was no power capable of serving, at least not one he could locate despite many years devoted to researching. He would teach his apprentice to mitigate his mortality, but in due time. There was no rush to share anything on the subject until he was assured of his mastery of it. That endeavor was also nearing completion, making him pause as he began to stir all the variables together. We must be complete, Lord Vader. He found himself concentrating. The issue was the gravity of all currently ongoing, directed by a single galaxy force that could only be mitigated if another had the same vision. This continually brought Palpatine back to his original frustrations and why he had prioritized capturing the Togruta. He had no sense in her agenda, motives, or destiny, but needed to see for himself the power this being possessed, and if there was any chance of manipulating it to his own needs. She had learned much from her former master, that was clear. The question was whether Palpatine could offer what he could convince her she lacked. He entertained himself with the cycle of replaying the Narshada holofeed. He was brimming with enthusiasm over the prospect of assisting that precision into his fold, with or without Lord Vader in the picture. Haha, yes. Perhaps I have spent too much of my attention directed to the wrong source. His thoughts confirming the contempt from within taking hold at his inability to invest the power within her genuinely. The perfect seed from the start, he said aloud, reflecting on her supposed expulsion from the Order. The seed was already planted. It was ripe from that very beginning, and he had been so blinded by Skywalker's natural ability and careful cultivation. Anger welled up from very deep within Palpatine, an anger he hadn't felt since being pushed by Kosinga on Chandrila. He would never curse himself for being aggressive in his methods or tasks. However, he would consider the wisdom of exploring all methods of opportunity measured against his haste for results. That is why he would succeed where no other Sith Master could. They had lacked the focus needed for galactic rule, a weakness his current apprentice was now exhibiting, one he could not allow to continue. It appears we have arrived just in time, Lord Vader, proclaimed Captain Raynal, watching the chaos unfold in real space above an actively failing planetary shield meant to secure Scarif. Rebel vessels in full retreat. The statement is obvious, Captain, replied Vader, watching with indifference towards the ships caroming into the Star Destroyer's hull. My interest lies only in the command vessel. Get us in closer. He turned to his left. Commander Price, prepare your boarding party and follow me. He sped away quickly from the command center and headed for the hangar bay, Cape billowing behind him. Boarding the strike craft, Vader's resolve was hardened by the countless times he had been in this situation, regardless of reason. He was coldly building his rage. Conversing with his master had a way of doing that independently, but he had learned to use it to light the fuse of his explosive anger. His feelings toward his master were of no consequence at this moment, however, as that fuse was growing shorter. The strike craft was pulling away from the destroyer and navigating toward a direct course for the command vessel. Vader's senses sharpened with determined focus as he brought his breathing in rhythm with the rage coursing through his very being. The rage needed no other conduit than himself. It was his most deadly weapon. The strike ship's pilot had carried out this exercise before and knew Vader would expect nothing less than max power. Within seconds, the pilot was already bringing the ship in line and firing the docket clamps deep into the rebel vessel's hull. The winches sped the ship into contact with the hull itself as the assigned troopers flung open the access hatch doors, while the cutting crew torched into the reinforced plating. Vader was behind them, pulling all the force energy he could inward. As soon as the torches met concentrically, he blasted the freshly cut panel deep into the opposing craft, as support troops from behind him began methodically discharging energy beams into the smoky interior. Chaos was Darth Vader's battle hymn. Screams from friend and foe echoed through the hall in the energy-riddled corridor. He needed no guide to obtain his objective, only the scent of fear, and it was heavy. He strode with purpose and great haste towards the communications suite, riding that scent, knowing he was precisely where he needed to be, as it had never been thicker. The point of terror, he always sensed, was always his way of deeming the correct insertion point to unleash his devastation, and these feeble rebels had led him to a hallway where they couldn't possibly hope to survive. He called upon the Force to negate power to the corridor to ensure their demise, knowing it would seal them in. The silence in this place only added to the sheer hopelessness they were all feeling, as all that could be heard, outside of their hearts, slamming into their chests, was the measured respiration from the darkened end of the hall. He didn't wait a second longer, as his well-used and worn tool of destruction came to life in his hand with the ever-satisfying sound of ignition. With doubt in her thoughts, Ahsoka hit the key on the navicomputer she had assigned as an alternate destination and engaged the hyperdrive. Exhaling deeply, she turned to Tsar. Let's shed light on some reality, she said directly. I do not follow the tenets of the Jedi, nor do I surrender myself to the order of the Sith. I serve what I feel in the moment. Quite often, that isn't me or myself. I will not submit to anyone's idea of what fits for them. That includes you. What is your angle? She felt foolish staring at a shadow, but meant every word. My angle is nothing more than what I spoke of. The vengeance felt decades ago is coming to pass, and we, have a great interest in what transpires and how it transpires in the mortal realm. What need is there that can't be felt or experienced in the realm of the Force? Ahsoka was determined to extract as much information as possible. Your presence betrays you, and who is the we you keep referring to? Ahsoka, perhaps this would be easier on the other side. I feel my concentration faltering, he replied. Have it your way. As you already understand, my abilities are only enhanced there. Tsar ceased to exist in the cabin, on the ship, or even in the mortal realm. Again, Ahsoka blew out her breath, wondering when she would ever get a moment's rest. Resisting the initial urge to call herself into the Force ultimately, she took a minute to digest everything he had said and brought a hand to her chin in quiet contemplation. There was a deliberate reason for his appearance that she hadn't been able to decipher, and was in no way compelled to place herself into the hands of another so closely attuned to the Force. There was great danger in pursuing this interest. She chuckled to herself, hearing the voice of Master Yoda in her thoughts inflect upon the same statement more times than she could count. The blue projection, still suspended above the holotable in the room beyond, reminded her of the need to see to the conclusion of at least one mystery, and one she felt better completing before putting herself into danger yet again. Ahsoka approached the suspended, yet paused, image with the same regard she had held earlier, knowing the face, yet unable to put a name to it. She cycled back and played the recording from the start, with the same results. The image was speaking, but in a language she could not decipher. She ran a modified translator protocol with scant hints of words but still unclear enough to understand. Watching everything within the image as she played it over yet again, she was confused by how his hands were moving and how his whole body was rocking back and forth with muscular correction taking place at the wrong intervals. It wasn't so much those subtle movements that anyone would take for granted. It was the blink of his eyes and the downturn at the corner of his lips upon completing a word, the way his tongue rolled back into his mouth rather than forward while speaking most languages. Gotcha. She ran the recording to its completion and switched the coder cycle to run in reverse order, starting the recording at its finish. Anea Moss, I presume, the figure spoke. I am, a voice responded. If you are as eager to carry out a task I offer, as you are difficult to find, you could be a very wealthy man. I'm listening. Would carrying out this task in the name of the Empire cause you any concern? The figure spoke. Where had she seen this man before? She could picture him in multicolored robes and finery, always with this head wrap, on Coruscant. A dignitary? A senator? No to both. She was always in the presence of the galaxy's finest of both politicians and nobility. This man was neither. He was an underling, always in the shadows. She crossed her arms before her, continuing to watch. I care not where the credits come from. What's the task and how much? The voice, the Aktochi, Ahsoka presumed, responded. A trove if carried out to completion. The apprehension of fugitive Ahsoka Tano, alive. She watched as the figure leaned closer, no doubt relaying her information to the deceased Anea Moss via secured holonet connection. Jedi? You must have mistaken me for a lunatic, and with a list of warrants that long, a trove takes on a whole new meaning to me, Moss said with a laugh. I assure you, this is no laughing matter, and upon her capture and imperial detainment, you have but to name your price. Besides, it's not as though you haven't tracked Jedi before, the figure returned. The stern look of the figure reminded Ahsoka of a particular event on Coruscant years earlier, one in which Anakin was conversing with the Chancellor, and those same eyes bore into her at Anakin's side. Pestage, Palpatine's crony. She remembered following up on several leads the Jedi were investigating, leads delved from informants in criminal networks and various other sources of questionable legality, all leading back to this man in one way or another. How he has aged, though, almost unrecognizable, Ahsoka thought, perhaps on purpose. What purpose, for that matter, would Palpatine have served in her apprehension? He was clear in that she was to be taken alive, and that fact was not lost on her. Sure, she was pretty adept at diving headlong into Imperial entanglements, but to draw the ire of the Emperor himself was a feat in and of itself. She would have to meditate on its meaning. Well, that does whet my appetite. I'll take the job. Last seen, Moss continued. Narshada, blasting her way out of the spaceport. There was a live feed leading up to her escape that has since been deleted, but I have an unrestricted copy for you. Again, Pestage leaned forward toward the holocam. She was in the company of a Mirialan female. She calls herself Kawani Amat, a known smuggler and purported ally to the rebellion cause. Her capture would also be rewarded, however, the condition of her return is entirely in your hands. Ahsoka felt the anger rise within her again. Anger at the audacity and openness with which this business transaction took place before her eyes. Anger burned its way into her blood at her naivety for not seeing the larger picture, which Obi-Wan himself had told her was coming. The anger boiled into a refined rage as she slammed her fist into the holotable. The movement jostled a small stack of holochips, scattering them across the control panel. All of them were labeled with her name. She knew what she would see. The carnage replayed in her memory constantly. The emotional balance within Ahsoka was slipping as she gave way to remorse for the damage she had caused and the lives she stole. An inconsolable act she regretted immediately upon seeing the devastation she had caused, the remainder of the exchange driven solely by her emotions. Emotion. Unchecked, it could turn her into a most dangerous foe or ally. She had answered her question. She was feeling an even more profound shame for calling such attention to herself at the cost of, possibly, her friend's life. Regardless of the outcome with Inea Moss, she knew Palpatine would find out one way or another that he had failed, and that the search for her would take on a life of its own. Ahsoka knew then what her intentions were, as referenced by Zar earlier. She felt the complete impact of what had only been a subconscious thought coalesce into extant thought. She would need to initiate the confrontation. She would need to cut the head off at the top, but she also knew she needed to start with the heart. Knowing what she needed to strive for, Ahsoka's thoughts returned to the Sadari Shilane, Tsar Ek. Divining his motives was best done in direct confrontation. To accomplish that, she would need complete focus. Asserting herself to the here and now, she dispelled all thoughts and emotions related to the past or future, centering herself on the absolute present. She began running through her litany of calming influences to place herself entirely within her control. Emotions must be controlled, she began reciting to herself. Through them, I become a conduit for others. She closed her eyes slowly as she began to kneel, hands on her knees. The familiar and welcoming peace she craved began its slow wash over her as she began the process of self-regulation. Focus on the self without the self. She slowly mouthed the words, an effort to leave her mortal concerns behind on this journey. In a symbolic gesture, she took each of the sabers at her belt from their clips and placed them in front of her. She would not need them, her mind being the only weapon capable of inflicting damage if necessary. She began building her walls, but did not solidify them, for a deluge of force energy would leave her momentarily unprepared upon arrival. The slow trickle of force energies, both light and dark, as they would need an equal representation for her balance, began to filter into her body on that connected spiritual level. The welcoming warmth and comfort constantly peeled back the layers of uncertainty and doubt she carried. Her focus was staunch upon feeling those gentle waves. She let them caress every part of her as they allowed her complete and decisive perception on every sensory level. I am the Force, she said with conviction and finality as she let the last vestige of her mortal self slip into the deep, transient void that would prove to be her next battleground. Barreling through hyperspace on a route new to her, Kawani continually rejected the idea of remapping their decant back to Dagobah. She had intelligence reports she didn't trust, even as secure networks and inspiring news to relate to reignite hope for the rebel cause. The flashing indicator on her control panel and audible signal ringing through the cockpit alerted her to the decant point selected, closer to Yavin 4 than even she realized. Pulling the lever back toward her, the sight of spherical greens and blues snapped into view. R3, these new routes are going to prove invaluable, she said, entirely for her benefit, her thoughts racing at the wellspring of opportunity they would create and the speed with which they could be traversed. Liberator, we have you on scan, awaiting authorization codes. The comm lit up, sating her with relief and unexpected comfort. Base 1, this is Liberator 220.33 Beta, Kawani said with a smile. Affirmative, Liberator, Platform 23, welcome home. Kawani eased into the yoke and brought the ship down through the gravity well of Yavin 4's upper atmosphere, relishing the feel of her feet back on home soil. Anxious to get planetside, she almost tripped out of the cockpit after feeling the landing gears retract, bearing the vessel's weight on their hydraulic supports. She flipped the switches with great haste, performing her post-flight shutdown only partially, as she knew she wouldn't be home long. Ahsoka needed her. R3, finish the post-flight, but stop at the plasma inductors. I won't be long. R3 responded in the affirmative. Kawani dashed for the boarding ramp as it broke its seal and hissed slightly before engaging. She jumped off the end before it had even finished its descent and right into the arms of Garand, who had rushed himself to the landing platform. Annie, I am so glad you made it back. We were all concerned after the reports at Narshada, he said genuinely. We might not have had it not been for Ahsoka, she responded. Ahsoka? Ahsoka Tano? A new voice questioned. Kawani looked up and into the eyes of prominent Irish senator. The same, Senator. She is currently en route to an unspecified location to, how did she put this? See an old friend, Kawani said, deciding to keep some of the details to herself. That is very welcome news, especially at this particular moment. Kaya's Cortis seemed to withdraw slightly. What's going on? Kawani was suddenly very aware of all the activity surrounding her. Techs and crews working on fueling, arming, and upgrading all the assembled fighters. Arms crews stacking ammunition beside ground batteries and anti-aircraft installations, maglifts carrying projectile shells, emergency crews assembled at strategic points with eyesight of her current position. Preparation, Miss Yamad. Asserting ourselves should this base be compromised, Cortis answered, clearly uncomfortable in his bland robe through the moon's jungle heat. The fleet took a big hit at Scarif, but did succeed in attaining plans for the Imperial superweapon, Garen finalized. Kawani, remembering the brief conference with Dak, had no idea things had escalated so quickly. Senator, we need to speak to General Willard, she insisted, grateful to have traded the dry Tatooine heat for the densely humid Yavin heat. Garen ushered the way into the Rebel Command Center. Senator Cortis in stride beside her. We had all feared Ahsoka perished on Malachor. How is it she comes to be alive after so long? She said. I don't even think she knows the answer to that, Senator, Kawani replied. There seems to be many things she is grappling with, she concluded with a downward glance at her feet. Your patience is to be commended, Annie. Had you not agreed to monitor that system, we would have all lost a precious ally. You'll get no disagreement from me on that, she returned, picking her head back up and freely smiling, thinking of Ahsoka. Kawani Ahmad, it is good to see you home again. It has been some time, General Willard said in his gruff, commanding voice. To your insistence on seeing me so quickly? He finished, dispensing with pleasantries. Yes, General, it is good to be home, if even briefly. I understand this base is on high alert due to the business of the Imperial superweapon. That isn't the only one. There is another, per sources, presumably beginning initial stage construction in the Model sector. Reaction from those assembled and a few High Council members were beset with discouragement and dejection. Kawani knew the news wasn't favorable, but didn't quite understand the depth of their reaction. On a more positive note, Ahsoka Tano has returned. The dejection vanished momentarily as everyone mulled over both bits of information. What does all this mean? General Draven was the first to speak. Honestly, we just went through this with Urso. That's for you to decide, General. For all of you to decide, Kawani said, waving her hand around the room. We learned a valuable lesson, General, in not heeding wisdom, regardless of its source. I feel that is something we should not waste, being provided a second opportunity in so short a time. Senator Caius came to Kawani's aid with nodding of approval through most of the room. We can discreetly investigate this information, Ani. I will endeavor to find that end myself. Ahsoka's return may have everything or nothing to do with us. That is entirely her choice. Would you not agree, General? She finished. The council members and others assembled were talking amongst themselves as General Draven shook his head in frustration. Kawani, looking for Garan, spotted him conversing with a group of roughly uniformed soldier officers. Gar, she waved, catching his attention. Gar, where is Cassian? I don't see him here. He's off on some covert mission, I suppose, she asked with a certain measure of jubilation. Ani, Cassian was lost on Scarif. Strike teams, gunships, support groups, and several capital ships were also lost. Most likely why your news didn't quite get the response you had been expecting, and the reason for that senator's quick defense. Garan said with a dour face, knowing Kawani would want the facts as plainly as possible. The price was exceedingly high. We hope it was all worth it. What exactly was the prize? Kawani was curious, despite the heartfelt loss she couldn't quite place. She knew the pledges and oaths they took held meaning, but not everyone would understand their ultimate price. Plans for that super weapon, we hope, Garand replied after some time, allowing her to compile the information he knew would be complex for her to digest. The gravity of the statement was not lost on her. Kawani spun her gaze skyward, focusing on the strata of clouds that threatened to steal the sun's light from the ancient temples. Cassian was more than a friend or confidant, she thought to herself, more than the immediacy of why she looked up to him. It was what he had always represented, that she felt was stolen from her in an action she hadn't even known about. Kawani began walking toward her ship, back into Yavin's jungle heat as a solitary RZ-1A roared into view just over the treetops. Kawani paused briefly as the A-Wing slowed and prepped for a landing cycle astride her Liberator. Feeling Garand's presence beside her, she turned slowly over her shoulder for the comment she was sure was coming. I know that wasn't easy for you, Annie. I am sorry I had to be the one to deliver the news, Garand said solemnly, raising a hand to her shoulder. Both of them watched as feverish ground crews began attaching fuel lines to the maneuverable fighter, carts below immediately replacing power cells and a boarding ladder rolling into place beside the cockpit. And I am sorry about Teth. I know what she meant to you, brother, Kawani replied, reaching a hand up to squeeze his. She could feel him squirm slightly under her pressure. Yeah, well, she was my Cassian, I suppose, but Danth wasn't Kino either, Garand replied with more exuberance than she felt the situation warranted. Kawani turned slightly to see the young man smiling from ear to ear, focusing entirely on the slim figure removing herself from the fighter's cockpit. Kawani rolled her eyes playfully and brushed the young man's hand from her shoulder. We wouldn't want the blonde from Pabu getting any ideas about us now, would we? She said sarcastically, tapping at her communication device and stepping toward her bone boarding ramp. Ideas about what? Garen caught the sarcasm when the fighter pilot removed her helmet and began descending the ladder. You're leaving so soon, Ani? We all have our part to play, Gar. I am simply playing mine. Her thoughts returning to Ahsoka. Where are you going? She began walking up the ramp and hesitated. She placed a hand on the support strut and turned her head to face Garand, who had stopped at the ramp's edge. The Force will guide me. She smiled at that knowledge, turned her head back, and finished climbing onto the ship.